Rather than using a blunt overt attack against a fully functional person, they usually attack covertly, and conceal their harassment by using existing events that occurs naturally. There is usually cover for the harassment as well. However, it is probably a statistical rarity for some of these staged events to occur as often as they do. They conceal much of their harassment choosing what appears to be a simple formula. From what I've learned, the basic formula is as follows. Frequency describes how often an event occurs. It also pertains to the number of acts within a single event. Duration pertains to the length of a single event. It also pertains to the non-stop nature of the harassment in general. Intensity, the amplification of acts such as sound, sight, crowding, etc. within an event. A hypothetical example of a car door slamming event would include this: one neighbor arrives and two others leave. As they're tending to their vehicles, there is the repeated opening and shutting doors and trunks, alarms going off, and beeping from alarms being turned on. These disturbances emanate from areas surrounding your house. This may happen simultaneously, or they may be strung together, one right after the other. Synopsis. The event lasted for 5 minutes. Longer than normal duration. In addition to length of the event being extended, the number of times each act occurred within the event was increased frequency. X multiple, repeated doors, trunk slamming from cars, even if a single individual is at the vehicle. This event also happens many times throughout the day. Frequency. Each individual act of door trunk shutting is amplified by deliberate slamming to produce a louder than normal noise intensity. The event was louder, contained more activity acts, and lasted longer than normal to produce a covert attack. Even if a single individual is arriving leaving, standard practice seems to be multiple slams: trunk, back door, driver's door. This may be synchronized with your activity, such as your arrival or departure. The event may also be a part of a noise campaign consisting of an alteration of other types of noise. This basic formula is used with many of the tactics outlined in this chapter. The frequency and duration formula is also used in mobbing. In addition to the overuse of an individual tactic, these tactics are combined and used in a round-the-clock fashion, which amplifies their overall potency. Basic protocol. There is a basic protocol that they begin with which is consistent in all NATO nations. It begins with the surveillance of targets, monitoring of their private lives, and entry into their homes break-ins. This is done so their personality traits can be cataloged. There is a basic protocol that the perpetrators begin with, states MC Kinney, but the TI targeted individual contributes to the modification. After they are singled out for preliminary stages of harassment, gang stalking ensues, which MC Kinney describes as part of a softening up process. After a period of overt surveillance, gang stalking, NLW are introduced. The NLW harassment gradually increases to extreme conditions. This pattern has unfolded consistently in all NATO countries. Dr. Munzert speaks of basically the same pattern, which he describes as a double-folded strategy. It is usually the same procedure, he announced, but with individual variations. One part includes the victims being attacked with microwave weapons, and the other part of the strategy, he says, is to portray the targeted people as mad insane. He explained the effectiveness of this approach as unbeatable, and reveals that this is essentially what the Stasi did to their targets. Part of this protocol appears to include elements of neurolinguistic programming (NLP), which is a type of mind control used by behaviorists to affect change. NLP will be covered in more detail shortly. Some of the tactics below have been called street theater, harassment skits, or staged events. They are planned harassment skits, such as blocking or swarming. They also include informants who surround targets and have conversations intended to be overheard, which contain information about the target's personal life. Presumably, citizen informants are told that this is necessary to let targeted people know they're being watched. This may happen in any public place. This is not a complete list of tactics, but it includes some of the more common ones reported. Some of these tactics will sound insane because they're deliberately designed to make someone appear as though they're suffering from a mental disorder. They were definitely created by experts in the behavioral sciences. In addition, people may be emotionally drained and unable to properly identify or explain what's happening to them. According to the DOJ, mental tactics designed to cause psychological harm must last for months or years before they constitute torture. The hidden evil fits this description, so keep in mind, these are psychological warfare tactics which are intended to drive people crazy. Character assassination is standard. My research leads me to conclude that it is not beyond these people to masquerade as concerned citizens and call local officials to register destructive complaints about a targeted person. I'm fairly certain they do this. This type of community service can be very damaging, especially when the complaints originate from multiple, seemingly unconnected sources. Sensitivity programs (NLP). Some of the sensitivity tactics used by these groups are borderline subliminal attacks designed to artificially create phobias. They are apparently based on neurolinguistic programming (NLP). You can think of NLP as a very powerful tool that can be used to produce rapid, profound change. The parts of NLP that groups use are anchors and triggers. The goal of these sensitivity programs appears to be to condition people with damaging emotions which are linked to triggers such as objects, colors, movements, and sounds. Once this is done, a target can be covertly injured openly in public. This may happen with or without the target's conscious awareness. As I'll demonstrate, this is brutally violent. To triggers a physiological state is called an anchor in NLP, stated O'Connor and Seymour in their book, Introducing NLP. They ask, how are anchors created? First, by repetition. Secondly, and much more important, anchors can be set in a single instance if the emotion is strong and the timing is right. This process of creating anchors has also been called emotional transference. We are unconsciously creating anchors in our environment all the time with people, music, places, and objects. These stalking groups are obviously led by people knowledgeable in the behavioral sciences. The groups are used to create negative emotional states in targeted people, such as fear and anxiety, and anchor them to common objects. This is the deliberate creation of a phobia. O'Connor and Seymour declare an external stimulus can trigger a very powerful negative state. This is the realm of phobias, they warn. This is nothing less than using violence to create an injury and then deliberately irritating it. Targets are constantly monitored, and if a target responds emotionally to a particular trigger, that will be built into the protocol, says M.C. Kinney. According to an article called Non-Lethality, which appeared in June 1993 issue of Lobster magazine, in the early 1980s, Dr. John Alexander taught NLP to selected general officers and senior executive service members as a set of techniques to modify behavior patterns. Some of the references used in this article were taken from Dr. Alexander's book, The Warrior's Edge, which was co-authored by Janet Morris, who, according to the article, was a student of the Silva course in Advanced Mind Control. In the structured chapter, I'll provide evidence that Dr. Alexander and Janet Morris have contributed to the creation of this program on behalf of the think tanks, as part of a political agenda. In their book, Dr. Alexander and Janet Morris wrote, in 1983, the NLP Training Group, along with John Alexander, was engaged to teach these skills to several members of Congress, including Al Gore and Tom Downey, under the auspices of Congressmen Clearinghouse on the Future, a bipartisan activity established to provide information to congressmen when they request it. He continued, one organization that played a major role in the dissemination of NLP skills was the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command INSCOM. Unlike the rest of the U.S. Army, INSCOM does not differentiate between wartime and peacetime roles. Anchoring, stated Morris and Alexander, is based on the neurophysiological assumption that patterns of behavior can be installed, then reactivated whenever a similar situation is encountered or created. Knowing this, you can intentionally install anchors to return your target to specific emotional states. The first step is to create the desired emotional state in the individual. There has been some concern in the mental health field over the potential misuse of NLP. Unfortunately, like other tools, such as guns, they can be misused in the wrong hands. Andreas and Faulkner warned of the possible uses and misuses of this technology, in their book, NLP: The New Technology of Achievement. They wrote, "We recognize the incredible power of NLP and recommend you exercise caution. The deliberate infliction of emotional pain is an act of violence. The use of NLP in this manner is similar to a physical attack such as a punch or kick, only it leaves no visible injury. Here's an example of how groups use NLP to make you aware that you're being stalked. One morning you're walking out to your car and a man walks in front of you, stares directly at you in a hostile manner while repeatedly clicking his pen the whole time. You feel a little uneasy and say to yourself, boy, that was weird, what was his problem? Then 2 hours later you're leaving a shopping mall on a day that it was not particularly crowded. As you walk out to your car, an old lady approaches you on foot. As she almost collides with you, she locks her eyes onto you with a hostile demeanor, while clicking a pen the whole time. Then maybe you tell yourself something like this. There couldn't be a relation between those events, probably just a coincidence. But they both stared at me in such a mean way while hammering the pens. Later in the afternoon, you're on your way home. You're at a stoplight and out of the corner of your eye you see a passenger in the car to your left. You hear a slight noise, and glance over. You see a man glaring at you with a grin on his face. His arm is hanging out the window and he is holding a pen, which he is repeatedly clicking. Now imagine that happening for a month. Then a few days later you're on a sidewalk with a friend or family member. A man walks by, doesn't look at either one of you, but clicks his pen a couple of times. You feel anxious and afraid. You may not even know you've been sensitized. One reason people may not realize that they're targeted or can't remember exactly when it began, is because these groups may slowly and gradually increase the harassment over time. But if you did recognize it as an attack, what would you tell your friend or family member? This is what happened. The collisions, blatant hostile staring, and foul grin created the negative emotions and anchored them to the pen, which has now become the trigger. That is an example of a sensitivity program. Now imagine yourself being sensitized to multiple objects and sounds, and each of them creating pain each time you see or hear them. Targets around the world have witnessed this being done with sounds, gestures, cell phones, laptops, pens, cars, watches, clothing, symbols, colors, and other items. This type of attack does require some maintenance and will lose its potency unless it is reinforced. So groups will reinforce these anchors and triggers with an occasional blitz attack from time to time. The example above is a simple tactic which groups can use to let you know that you're being harassed in public. But there are many other attacks which NLP can be used for. For instance, you have recently experienced an extremely traumatizing event which may have been facilitated by a faction of this network, such as an accident, death of a family member or pet, or some type of a brutal assault. Those who have you under surveillance know that there is a color, object, or sound that you've linked anchored massive pain to. Then shortly afterward, you are stalked by multiple people who carry that object, wear that color, or utter that phrase. This brings to the surface all the emotional pain you suffered during that experience. Imagine this happening again and again, every time you go outside. Now think what it would be like if your family and friends started to participate. Groups will take an object you've been sensitized to and link it to another object. The idea appears to be to keep expanding the amount of objects you associate fear, anxiety, anger, or shame with. For instance, one of your neighbors has made it clear that they're participating in the harassment. Now, you know they're participating, and they know you know. So they may try to sensitize you to another stimulus such as a car alarm. Because you've already associated them with massive pain, they can extend their harassment to a sound by turning their car alarm on off in rapid succession over a short period of time, multiple times throughout the day. After they've done this for a couple of days and you've been sensitized to the sound, they can reduce their use of the specific tactic and just use the occasional maintenance sounds to inflict pain. Now instead of repeatedly turning it on off 10 times, they only do it 2 or 3 times in a row, just to let you know you're being attacked. Even though it's only done a couple times in a row, you know why they're doing it and you may feel anger, fear, anxiety or other negative emotions. You may also feel frustrated at the prospect of trying to explain this harassment to another individual. Anyone else observing this might think it's a little strange that someone would turn their alarm on off a few times, but they'd probably write it off as an isolated strange incident. But because they have not had your experience with that sound, and are not aware that it is a small part of a much larger harassment program, it would be difficult to explain that those beeps were attacks. In NLP, the process of copying an emotional state from an existing trigger to a new trigger is called chaining. O'Connor and Seymour state, anchors can be chained so that one leads to another. Each anchor provides a link on the chain and triggers the next one, just as the electrical impulse flows from nerve to nerve in our body. After a person has been sensitized to a color or object, the article can become a unification symbol for the group, much like a uniform. For instance, after a person has been sensitized to the color red, she is surrounded by people wearing red cloths in public. Furthermore, this is an adaptable uniform because it can be changed in less than 5 minutes. If a person who realizes that they're being gang-stalked has been sensitized to red, then the organizers of these groups can simply have them blitzed by a horde of citizens wearing the color blue. The harassment has now been chained to this color. Most likely, these uniforms also help promote group cohesiveness, and may foster feelings of empowerment among stalkers.